Welcome to 49cc Scoot and part 11 of the TMAX 500 service series. My name's Brent, and today I'm going to be reinstalling body panels. Before I get started, I want to say that now is the time to clean your body parts. Well, that doesn't sound right. Don't run for the shower. What I mean is, now is the time to clean all of the plastics, all the fairings, like my storage box here. You can clean them inside and out and get all the areas that you can't reach when they're installed. So do a good job on them now, and you'll have a really clean scooter when it goes back together. The storage box is the first part that I want to reinstall. But before I do, I've got to once again disconnect my fuel pump connectors as well as my vent hose, because those have to be routed through the storage box. If you want to see this stuff in great detail, go back to part 1 of this series. Now I can start to get this into position, but in the front I've got to pull through my fuel pump coupler and my fuel hose. You'll also have to disconnect this little overflow hose, and then it's going to have to go around the front. Before moving the storage box down any further, I'm going to install the seat lock here. So you can see it positioned right here behind the fuel tank and in front of the storage compartment. So to begin, you've got to get the 4 holes lined up, and on this side the bracket that's up there can flip around, so make sure you've got it the right way. There's only one way that it'll actually fit and that all of the holes will align. I'm going to start by bolting this side on just loosely. There's an extra step on this side, so first get your holes aligned, then drop in the spacers, but then before you bolt it on, you should have a little bracket that looks like this. It's got a tab that faces up. Position it exactly as you see it here. Then you can bolt that on. Now I can reconnect my hose and my coupler. Now I'll take the fuel tank vent hose and position that in this passageway on the side of the storage compartment. And there's a little sort of clip here to hold it in place. Just squeeze the hose until you get it underneath of there. And then the hose as well as this cable lock both need to go through this little indentation here. Then you can look through this access panel and you can see the barb that attaches to. So just get the hose routed up to that and slide that on, and make sure you install the clamp as well. There's a light assembly on the back of the storage box, and that has one connector. So take that connector and wire, route it through the frame, kind of underneath the scoot, and then on the side you should see some wiring connectors and harnesses. Connect that to the one that it fits, and it only fits one of them. Now I'm going to lift up the back of the storage compartment just a little bit so I can fit the seat hinge housing in there. There may be a little bit of wiggling to get this to sit how it should, but when it's in there right, this housing should sit on top of the storage compartment here on these rear tabs. Now I'm going to carefully push the storage compartment down until it is sitting right up against the frame in all of its mounting locations. When you do this, just keep a close eye on this fuel hose here, as well as your cable latch assembly. Again, should be going through this little indentation. And watch all your other hoses and make sure nothing's getting crushed. Next, there are 6 what I'm going to call perimeter bolts. One here, here, and all the way up front here, and the same thing on the opposite side. Pay close attention to all of your hardware throughout the process and make sure you're using the right pieces. Here's one example. If you look at these two spacers, this one has a larger hole, it's got a larger bushing in there, and this one's a bit smaller. You're going to need the larger ones because some spots like these in the back will fit better with that larger piece. Also, sometimes these may be used for a little bit larger bolt, like this may fit an M8 bolt and this may only fit an M6 bolt. Now the 4 spacers and bolts for the inside of the storage compartment. Now the rollover valve needs to be secured. So it's got a little bracket on it, and on the storage compartment there's a little tab with a speed clip. Just slide that over and secure the bracket to the speed clip. Now the fuel pump access cover just slides over these 2 posts and sits in place. I'll use 2 of these small pins to secure the seat hinge housing. There are a couple of variations of these throughout the scooter, but there's a whole lot of them. They all work essentially the same way. Just make sure when you install them that you've got the pin popped up like you see here. Then once you install this part down flush against whatever the panel is, then you push the top down to secure it. Now the mudguard can be installed. To be honest, I thought about leaving this thing off because I do think it looks a little bit cooler to have it open back here. However, I don't really enjoy having road debris thrown up on my back all the time if I'm riding in the rain, so I'm going to go ahead and reinstall it. There are 4 bolts or studs coming out through the top of the mudguard here, and then there are 4 holes that correspond right in here. So what you're going to have to do is route that under there, align those, and push it up. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and drop these little spacers in place that go over each one of the holes, and they'll be secured with nuts, so I'm going to go ahead and drop those in there so I've got them when I need them. And now I'll go ahead and see if I can get this started. Now I can install the nuts while holding the mudguard in place. There should be 2 wires coming out of the mudguard for a tag light, and you should be able to find 2 wires nearby that will match up to those. These both use the same connectors, so you could easily connect them wrong. Make sure you pay attention to the colors. You can see there's blue on this wire, this one's black, and then if I peel this back a little bit, I've got some blue here, and this is a black wire. Now I've got a crawl under, and then over here in this corner you can see that there are 2 holes through plastic parts. This is the mudguard and the storage box that align with each other, and a little pin should go through there. There's a spot here, and then one that corresponds right over here on the exact opposite side. The seat hinge assembly will attach with 4 bolts in the holes in the very back of the frame. Now there's a connector coming off the seat hinge that matches up with this one from the frame. Now the fuel tank cover can go in place. On each side of the rear of the cover, you should have 3 mounting holes, here, here, and here. This one and this one can be used now. Align them with the posts underneath of them, and then you can put screws in there. The one in the back here on each side should be left alone for now because another panel will attach to that. I would advise that you don't tighten these all the way until you get all of the screws started. Then there are two spots for screws here and here. And finally there's a metal tab up front where one bolt goes through. I'm going to torque this and then I'll go around and tighten all the screws. While I'm doing this, I want to point out, when you drop this thing in place, make sure you get the tabs here down inside of the storage box. There's a little lip on the storage box. Make sure you get the tab inside of there. I didn't do that the first time. Had to go back and loosen the screws even more and tuck that in. Then everything aligned. Now I'm going to take the rear fairing assembly and get this at least roughly in place on the back of the scooter. There's plenty of stuff to get hung up on, so just be careful, take your time when you do this. Before this gets pushed all the way forward, come to the rear and you should find one connector coming off of the frame and one coming off of the taillight assembly that need to be connected. Watch the wiring in the rear to make sure nothing's getting pinched and everything looks like it's in a safe spot where it belongs. And move this entire assembly forward until you get it where it needs to be and the holes will start to align. This tab actually needs to go behind the fuel tank cover, so you're going to have to kind of push this down, pull the fuel tank cover out, and slide that up there. And it's the same way on both sides. On the right side, there's an oxygen sensor lead that needs to tuck into these clips here on the panel. When you look under the scooter, you should see that there are tabs on this that align with tabs in the mudguard. Those also need to be pushed under the mudguard. And each one gets a pin. Next, the screw goes through the gas tank cover and this rear cover and into the storage box here on each side. Now I've got a rubber cover that goes over this connector, and that's got a little cable tie. I'm going to put that through here and then through the holes in this rubber cover around the wires and secure that. There's a small plastic panel that goes under the tail light here, so make sure all of your wires are tucked up in there. Then on the bottom of the panel you can see you've got a few clips. They correspond with different spots here on the fairings and the tail light. So get all that stuff aligned and slide that down into place. You've got to kind of slide it down because there's this little tab here and this spot on the tail light that align with each other. So push up and slide down, and there it's kind of clipped in place. Then one pin goes here, and there's another right here on the other side. For this panel, it's got this long tab in the back. That needs to go under here, so when it goes on it's got to be pushed forward, so that tab is going over this. Then you can see it's got small tabs here and some big clips up front. So you're going to need to push it forward, get everything aligned, and snap it down into place. Then there's a pin on each front corner. Now it's time for the grab bars to be installed, or in my case a rear rack. So if you've got grab bars, it's going to be a little different than what you see. For grab bars, you'll just have 2 bolts for each grab bar, one goes on each side. I've got this aftermarket Yamaha rack. So this is all one piece. I've got the 2 bolts on each side, and then I've got an additional bolt back here. Just line that up, drop it down in place. And make sure each one of these bolts has a washer on it. Each of the side holes has a small rubber cap that presses in. If you've got the rack like mine, the one in the rear does not have one of these caps. The seat's going to be next. On the underside of that, there are 4 studs sticking out. Those will align with 4 holes in this seat hinge. And you're going to need 4 nuts to install that. So make sure you've got the nuts handy. That way, once you get the seat in place, you're ready to bolt it in. I want to make sure I can close this before I move on. Closes easily, and I'll make sure it opens as well. This big front cowling assembly is going on next. There is a hole right here for a bolt, and that mates up to this spot right here on the frame. When I first put this up here, I'm going to line those up and put a bolt in there, and that's going to hold it in place for me. The first bolt is in place but not tightened all the way down because I want to start a few other things first. I'm going to begin with, on each side there's a bolt in this location right up top. You may have to move it around to align the fairing with the frame and get those started as well. Now I'm going to torque all 3 of the bolts that I just installed. And they only give you a spec for the bolt that I'm torquing right now up front, but I assume that they intend for these 2 to be the same spec. I believe most of your body bolts are going to be this torque spec. Now on the bottom of each side of this fairing you should find a coupler for the headlights, as well as one that corresponds to it from the frame. And somewhere nearby you should find a clip that will let you secure that wiring to this front panel. This big storage compartment section is next. With this one, you've got to sort of spread the bottom here open so it goes around the frame, and then you've got to very carefully work the top in and get this section to go around the key or the ignition. I've added 12-volt outlets in the back of each one of my storage compartments, or glove boxes as I call them. So I've got to make sure I get those plugged in before this is worked all the way into position. I'm going to start a bolt here and here, and I'm not going to tighten the fasteners until I get the rest of them installed in this panel. Then one goes into this hole, and the same thing on the other side. Now I'm going to open the glove box, and when you look in there you can see a spot here and here for a couple of little screws with Allen heads. Same on the other side. One screw goes in here on each side. Now I'm going to look at the joints all the way around this panel make sure they're mated up pretty tightly. As long as that's good, then I'll go ahead and tighten all these fasteners. Now for these in the glove boxes, I'm just going to snug them with a screwdriver like I treat any screw. They don't actually give you a spec that I see for the 4 bolts, but I'm going to use the same spec that I use for all the other body bolts. Gauge cluster is going in next. For this, I come in from the top, and then you've basically just got to work it in here. So you can get it down that far pretty easily. On the front edge, you want this black panel here to fit over top of the storage compartment panels. But you're just going to have to sort of push down on these while you start to lay this panel back, the gauges back. And then you've got to watch, there's little tabs on each corner here. I just sort of put light pressure on there and work it down slowly. And when it's about here, so it's a little easier, I go ahead and plug in the harness on the back. Push this little rubber cover up around it to seal it. You should see some tabs on the cluster and some spots that should align with those on the top of this storage section. So just work those into place. Now the cluster should be sitting below this lower handlebar cover. And there's one hole in each side that should align with a speed clip below it. So you can go ahead and put these screws in and snug them up. The gauge cover is next. So slide it through this opening in the front and then just work it down until you get it resting on top of the gauges. On each side of the cover there are 2 holes here on this tab. One aligns with a hole below it and another will push down over a little nub. Once that stuff's aligned in the front, there's a little peg under here right about in this area, and it goes into a rubber piece below it on the frame, and you've just got to push this down to get those 2 to lock together. Then there's a pin that goes through these holes on each side. Then there's a little chrome trim piece that goes around these. You should notice you've got little openings all around, and then on the back of here you've got little tabs, so you just need to align those and be gentle with this if it doesn't start. Figure out what's not aligned right because this thing is fairly delicate. But just start working that on, pushing it in all the way around. There we go. Next, the windshield bracket lower cover. It should just sort of slide forward here, and then you'll see that you've got these tabs here and there's slots here on the gauge cover. This one also has 2 holes. The front one aligns with a speed clip below it, and you can see the back one aligns with a little nub. That's on each side. Next up is the upper handlebar cover, and as long as all of your wiring and cabling are routed as it says in the cable routing section, it should just slide over the top. And then again, like everything, if you look around the edges you'll see a few tabs to align. Now I'm realizing that I definitely screwed up when I installed my front brake hose, because I do have enough room above it, but I don't have enough room below it. I saw that the hose was running into this lower panel before, didn't think a whole lot of it. But now that I'm trying to put these together, they are definitely not going to fit together because it's pressing too much on the lower panel. What I did was, there are 2 tabs here coming off of the master cylinder reservoir, and I put that little piece of the hose through there, between them. What I should have done was put it so that the hose was on top of this one, so that it was aimed this way, and then I would have had plenty of room. Alright, let me tell you what I did, and then we'll try this again. So first, I removed the cap from the master cylinder, used a syringe, and sucked the fluid out of there, and sopped a little bit up with a paper towel. Then, I put some rags underneath of this fitting. I loosened it up, and before it was all the way out, I was able to move it up where it is now, and then retighten it. Refilled this, had to bleed the brakes again, and I've got my lever tied down so it can hopefully stiffen up overnight or whatever. I thought that would do it, did a test fit of the top cover, still didn't do it. The top cover was running into the top edge of the banjo bolt here still. So whatever difference there is in the thickness of the banjo fitting itself and the bolt that Melosi used is just enough that this can't be mounted in the same position. So I loosened up the brake lever master cylinder assembly, and then I rotated it down a little bit, not a whole lot, but changed the angle slightly and moved it in a little bit, probably a little shy of 1/8 of an inch in towards center, and now it seems that this should fit. Once again, trying to get everything aligned all around the edges, all these little tabs. And there it should finally fit together. If you look in the front, you should find a bolt hole right here at the bottom and right here. Easiest way to access these is just to turn the wheel. Then you can get in there and put a screw in each one of those. Again, no torque spec for screws, just snug them up. And there's one more screw here in the back. Now I'm going to move on to the right footrest panel. That's this big side panel. Before I put this on, I want to point out you've got a couple of prongs up here. Those are going to have to push forward into two holes, two grommets right up here. Start by getting these two tabs up there. Now I'll get down here, and I'm going to get these prongs or pins going through the grommets that I just told you about. Let's push those together. Now I'm just kind of pushing everything down, making sure all of my mounting holes can align. I've got two bolts to start right here down bottom. Just going to push this into position. Get one started, and the second one up here. Just like the other panels, I'm not going to tighten anything all the way until I get some more fasteners in there. And one bolt goes in this tab right here. And a screw here. I've got two screws up front, one here and one here. One is an Allen head, and one is a Phillips or JIS. The easy way to tell, you may be able to make it out in the service manual, but if not, just think about if the screw is showing. So this screw will be hidden behind another panel. For anything hidden, they tend to use the JIS screws or Phillips. The ones that are in plain view when everything's finished, they tend to use the Allens on. And while I'm doing this, I'm trying to make sure my panels are really butted up everywhere that they need to be. And I'm actually going to go ahead and tighten this one, and then I'll go around and tighten all of the others. I won't go into detail about the left side panel because it's almost exactly the same as the right side panel. I will point out a couple of things though. First, this is my fuel tank overflow hose, and there's a little indentation in this panel. Obviously you've got a grommet here, so you need to pull out a little bit on the panel and get that grommet so that it slides into that groove. And if you look at the service manual on the opposite side, on that right side panel, they say that the fuel tank breather hose goes in there just like this. However, I put mine back together exactly as it was, and I've never had a breather hose in there from the factory, unless somebody changed it before me, but I don't think so. It appears to me that they may have changed the routing of that after 2009 when my manual is for. Another thing to pay attention to on this side is that the brake line will run over top of this and through behind it, but they've got a little clip here that you need to put the brake line in. Now there's a panel like this on each side, and again, this one's got a whole bunch of tabs. It's also got push pins on the back, 3 of them, so you got to get all of that stuff aligned. You can see these grommets here, that's where the pins go, and then of course the tabs go along the edges. In the very back, use the bolt with a big head. And this panel is positioned pretty well because of all the pins and such that it has. So I'm going to go ahead and torque this now. They do not show a torque spec on this. Again, I'm using the body bolt torque that you'll see for most of the scooter. Front 2 bolts have a little bit smaller head with a little bit taller profile. And I'm going to torque these the same way. Actually, I'm not, because I don't like the feeling of putting more pressure than that on there, so I'm just going to basically snug them up with this. I'm not hitting the torque spec. And this one goes on the same way. This panel, it's got a little tab back here you got to push back. So I start on the bottom and push that back. And then once that's in place, you can get the front pushed down. Got some tabs on the sides, so just make sure you're kind of pushing the sides together. And now it's just 2 screws here and here. And there's this panel. I'm gonna put the top here, up around underneath of the handlebars. Get that into position. Just kind of lay it down. This one doesn't really clip like the others do. There's 2 screws on the top, and then one right here in the bottom center. The one in the bottom center uses sort of a specialty bolt. It's the only one like it on the scooter. It's got a black or dark head, and it's an Allen key. None of these are going to be torqued. I'm just going to snug them up. As long as you can see that the top bolts are aligning, you can go ahead and torque the bottom one, or tighten it. On the top bolts, just turn the handlebars, and then it's easy to access those. The bottom cowling is going on next. That's the piece that goes over the radiator. On the back side of this, it's got a couple of clips here. When this is being put up into place, I'm going to try to secure my ignition coil wire into those 2 clips. And the way I'm going to initially secure this to the bike is with these 2 holes here, which are for 2 bolts. And there are just 2 tabs up here that those will bolt onto. If you look under the scooter on the radiator bracket, you'll see there's a hole there. As long as your cowling is installed properly, you should have a hole there that aligns with it. If you can't get this to pull back easily and align with that, then there's a little sort of ledge that goes up by your radiator on this cowling. You may have to push that up and get that to pop into place so that this moves properly. There's the same thing here on the other side, just a little bit harder to get to because of the coolant reservoir and hoses in front of it. Now I'll be installing two panels at once. The first one is this large lower painted panel, and the other one is this small panel. They've got to go on together because they kind of lock together, and they also lock in place with one of the other panels down here. You'll see in a minute they've got to overlap each other. But to begin with, this is the top of this panel. You can see you've got 3 tabs here. And if you look at the floorboard, you can see these 3 openings here. So align those tabs with those. They should slide in over top of the little tabs inside of the openings. And then just push this panel in. Up front in the corner, you've got kind of an L-shaped piece here and a little tab behind it, so make sure you push those together and then work your way down the seam. Go all the way around, make sure everything is tucked in there nicely. Now this tab on the bottom needs to be tucked behind this cowling. And you'll also see there's a little lip on there, a ledge on there that should go behind here. Now there's this panel, and if you look here on the front, you can see there's an oval shaped opening with 2 little pegs. And if you look here, there's an oval shaped opening with 2 little slots. So pull this forward and then slide this panel in there until those 2 parts lock together. And you've also got this little tab that's going to slide into here. In the back, you've got this tab that actually needs to go behind this. So you've just got to kind of work all this stuff together. So that tab needs to go behind here, and then you've got a lip or a ledge here that's got to sit behind this panel. So you just got to kind of work that all in. And then you should see this sits right up against the hole down here. Now I'm going to go around and start installing all these screws. Like all the other panels I've shown you, I'm not going to tighten these all the way until all of the screws are in place. This spot here with those tabs that interlock uses a different bolt than everything else. You can see it has a little bit of a shoulder on there, and it's actually a bolt thread, not just a screw thread. And this spot is for a pin. Everything's started, so now I can go around and tighten all the screws and bolts. I almost forgot, one pin needs to go right here in the bottom corner of the cowling. The lower panel on this side goes on basically the same way, but it's actually quite a bit easier because you don't have any panel back here to tie into it. There's a panel like this on each side, and they're both going to go on the same way. On the back up top, you've got 4 clips. They go in these spots here, and when you put it on, you're going to have to push it in place. They've got a few spots for pins. They'll pin to that cowling, and then a couple of screw holes here or speed clips. You're going to screw through the floorboard part here into there. But to begin, just get this all lined up. Get the top clips aligned, and when you're pretty confident that it's where it should be, then you can kind of start popping these into place. push this in a little bit. That'll make my holes align, and then I can put the screws in place. Now a pin goes here, here, and up here. And then I can tighten these. Now just do the exact same thing on this side. This is really simple. These little decorative pieces, just drop them into place. And then there are 4 countersunk bolts. And these will actually be torqued to 10 Newton meters. While I'm over here, this floor mat just has a bunch of rubber nipples on the back, and then there's a little edge up here that fits under this edge. So start by kind of tipping it down into that front edge so it sits under this plate, and then all you've got to do is push it down into place. It's the exact same process on the other side. At this point, the worst of it's over. Aside from this panel here that I'm about to put on, it's pretty much just like what you'd need to do to access your battery from here out. Speaking of that, my battery's already installed. If yours is not, make sure this is installed obviously before you put all these front panels back on. So I'm going to begin with this one, and I also need to point out I'm using an aftermarket windshield, so that does make this process different than if you're using a stock windshield. I'm going to start with this piece. This is going to sit over here, and it locks in with this other piece back here. It's got a couple of pieces of hook and loop or Velcro aligned with that, and this top edge on it will need to slide up into there. So I'm going to push the top edge into there, and then kind of push down so that Velcro can get against each other. And then just make sure everything else around here is roughly in position. If you've got a stock windshield, you won't have this little piece. This is something that came with my aftermarket windshield. Normally there would be a piece of the stock windshield, but they actually call the windshield the clear part. Bolts on up here. There's 3 screws. Now this rubber battery cover can go on. The big hole down bottom goes around this piece sticking out there. Slide that over, and then you should see multiple holes that will align. There are 5 different ones. All of those take pins. Now I can install my windshield. For me, this is the entire windshield. If you've got the stock set up, this is basically what they call the, I think, front upper inner panel. And it's going to go on with a bunch of these little plastic screws. Be really careful with these. Do not over tighten them. They don't give you a torque spec, but just gently snug them up because it is very easy to strip these. And unfortunately, I've even broken these off before when I first got this scooter. So be really careful. Once they're all in place, then you can go around and tighten them up. But again, be very cautious when you do this. This Y-shaped panel is the very last panel that we have to install. On the back of it, you've got a couple of clips at the very top, so the Y, and down here, a couple of big pegs. They go into these 2 rubber grommets. So get everything aligned. And I'll usually start with those pegs, pushing that part of it in. Then go up here and get these clips in. The bottom of this panel has a couple of little tabs, and then it's got tabs on the bottom that will sit above the little tabs on the bottom of this panel when you push it in. And on the bottom, below the headlights, there's a hole here and one over here that need pins. And the very last parts are the mirrors. Before they go on, there's these little rubber pieces that need to slide over the studs. And the mirror goes on there. And install and torque both nuts. Then I'll slide this little rubber cover in place. And you gotta just push the lip of that underneath of the windshield. And I've said it a bunch by now, but same thing on this side. I changed the oil and the V-belt as part of this service, so I need to reset their trip meters. So first I'll hit select, that's the button on the right, until I get to the oil meter here. You can tell it's oil, it'll pop up and say oil there. Then I'm going to hold reset, it should start flashing. Now I'll hold it again for about 3 seconds and it should reset. There we go. Now I'll hit select, I'll go to my V-belt. Same process, hold reset for a second, it flashes, let off, hold it again for about 3 seconds, and there it's reset. I've got just one more thing that I need to mount, and I'm going to put it back here on my Mudguard. Rob, he goes as Captain Caveman on the forums, sent me a little guardian bell, or gremlin bell, a lot of people call them, ward off the evil spirits or something like that. So I'm going to hang him right back here underneath my Mudguard with a little bit of mechanics wire. It's almost hard to believe, but there it is, finally done. Feels good to have it done. It's been a long process for me. It's been off the road for about 7 months. 3 months of that it sat there and did absolutely nothing. The other 4 months I was trying to work on it, film, edit, etc. to do this whole video series. So if you've appreciated that, if you've enjoyed the videos, or if you found them helpful, please make sure to give the video a like and make sure you subscribe for more and click the bell to receive notifications. I'm pretty much done with this TMAX project. The only thing left, I'm going to go out and do a couple of rides, maybe 20 to 50 miles. I'm going to be fairly easy on it because I want to try to break in the belt. After each ride, I'm going to let it cool down before I ride it again. So I'm trying to heat cycle the belt. I'm not really worried about breaking in much else, but I definitely want to make sure that I take care of the belt because, as you've seen earlier in the video, if you watch the CVT part, this thing hardly wore in 28,000 some odd miles. So it definitely pays to take care of them, and I want to make sure this one lasts just as long as the last one did. Once it's broken in, then I plan to do a couple of quick performance tests because I'm very curious to see if the head porting as well as the clutch made any difference. And I'm also curious how the clutch is to live with. Just from moving it out here for this shot, I can tell you that it definitely revs up a bit more before it gets moving. But who knows how that'll feel day to day riding it around. But I'll definitely update you on this, so that's why you got to make sure you're subscribed. As always, thank you for watching.